Love is always born like a whisper. It comes in small gestures, in glances across crowded rooms, in laughter that lingers even when the sound has faded. Mary and Godwin's love was no different. They met in the glow of city lights, not in a fairy tale meadow. It was a late evening at a bus station, where people hurried in and out like fragments of unfinished stories. Godwin, with his worn-out shirt and tired smile, had offered Mary his seat. She, exhausted from a long day at work, had accepted with a faint thank you. That was how it began, with a seat, a smile, and the quietness of two souls colliding in the middle of ordinary life. The first weeks of their knowing each other were filled with simplicity. They shared coffee at a rundown cafe where the tables rocked unevenly. They walked through rain, laughing as their shoes soaked and their hair clung to their faces. Love was not grand for them, it was tender, like an old song that only the heart remembered. Godwin worked as a clerk in a small firm, his days spent behind ledgers and figures that blurred together. Mary was a nurse, her nights long and filled with the cries of strangers. Yet, when they came together, it was as though the world softened. It wasn't passion that defined them at first, it was gentleness. A reflection of love not in what was spoken, but in what was endured together. They married in a small chapel on a cold afternoon. There were no grand flowers, no golden arches, no choirs singing loud hymns. Just the murmur of a priest, the nervous shifting of feet, and the look in their eyes when they said, "I do." For Mary, it was the embrace of belonging. For Godwin, it was the beginning of a vow he hoped he could keep, to protect, to provide, to cherish. But marriage is not only about love. Marriage is bills, sleepless nights, misunderstandings, and sacrifices that dig deep into the bones. In the early years, they lived in a small apartment with cracked walls that carried every sound from the neighbors. They laughed about it at first. When the couple next door fought, Godwin would turn it into a comedy, mimicking voices until Mary laughed until she cried. When babies cried through the night, Mary would hum lullabies as if soothing children who weren't hers. But laughter, though powerful, doesn't pay rent. And soon, money crept into their marriage like a shadow that refused to leave. Godwin tried. He took side jobs, delivering packages, repairing small electronics, even carrying boxes for shops. Mary picked up extra shifts at the hospital, often coming home with eyes red from exhaustion. Their love became sacrifice, stolen moments of sleep, hurried dinners, and long embraces at the door before one left for work and the other returned. It was a reflection of love, yes, but also of pain. Money has a way of testing love. It turns affection into silence, dreams into arguments, warmth into cold. The debts piled. The landlord grew impatient. Mary's salary was often delayed. Godwin's company cut hours. There were nights Mary came home to find Godwin staring at the table, bills spread like wounds before him. She would place her hand on his shoulder, and he would say nothing. His silence spoke louder than words, of the weight he carried, of the shame of not being enough. Mary, too, felt the ache. She longed for a day when they would not count coins before buying bread. She longed for a dress she could wear without guilt. She longed for sleep, deep and uninterrupted, without the anxiety of what tomorrow demanded. But longing, like love, was a luxury they could not afford. Still, in their poverty, there was tenderness. Mary would cook his favorite meal, even if it was only rice and stew stretched thin. Godwin would wash her uniforms late at night, so she could rest for an hour longer. They rarely said, "I love you," but they lived it, in every small act, in every sacrifice. Yet, love does not silence the hunger of the body. It was always at night. When the world was quiet, when exhaustion had stripped them bare, when words no longer carried meaning. Midnight became their time. Their lovemaking was not wild or cinematic, it was melancholic, poignant, tender. It was not an escape, but a survival. At midnight, in the silence, they found a way to embrace. To remind themselves that despite money, despite debts, despite the crumbling apartment walls, they still had each other. Mary would lie in Godwin's arms, feeling the warmth of his chest, his breath heavy with fatigue. She would close her eyes, and in that embrace, she found refuge. Godwin would hold her tighter, as if holding back the world itself. Midnight sex was not about passion, it was about pain transformed into closeness. It was about the power of embrace, about love that did not need words. It was the way they healed each other in the darkness, if only for a while. And yet, it was also filled with sadness. Because in the morning, reality always returned. Years passed. The struggles did not ease. Godwin grew quieter, weighed down by failures he did not speak of. Mary, though resilient, carried the sorrow in her eyes like permanent shadows. The arguments came, slowly at first. About money, about work, about dreams deferred. They never shouted loud, but the silence afterward cut deeper than any words. One night, after a bitter quarrel about unpaid rent, Mary sat by the window and wept. Godwin approached, placed a hand on her shoulder, but she did not lean into him. Instead, she whispered, "Are we losing us?" He said nothing, because deep inside, he too wondered the same. Love often demands sacrifices that hurt. Mary received an offer to work abroad, a nursing position in a foreign hospital, with pay far beyond what they had ever dreamed. But it meant leaving Godwin behind, for at least 2 years. She hesitated. She thought of their midnight embraces, of the silence they shared, of the way he held her as though she were his last reason to breathe. But she also thought of the bills, of the future they could never build if she stayed. Godwin urged her to go. His voice was steady, though his heart broke with every word. "Mary, this is our chance. Go. I'll wait," she cried that night in his arms, their midnight embrace heavier than ever. Their lovemaking was slow, sorrowful, filled with tears. It was not passion, it was farewell. When she left, Godwin stood at the airport, waiting with a smile that barely hid his grief. She looked back one last time, and their eyes locked. It was a reflection of love, sacrifice, pain, all in a single glance. Letters, calls, and silences filled the years. Mary worked endless shifts, sending money home, her voice always tired when she spoke to Godwin. He, in turn, told her of the little repairs he made in their apartment, of how he waited for her, of how he counted the days. But distance is a thief. Slowly, the embraces grew cold. Midnight was now spent apart, with empty sheets and unspoken loneliness. Godwin began to fade. He grew sick, though he did not tell Mary. He did not want her burdened, not when she was already sacrificing so much. He held onto her letters at night, clutching them like embraces that were no longer real. 2 years later, Mary returned. Her eyes were brighter, her hands stronger, her wallet fuller. She brought gifts, savings, promises of a better life. But when she entered their apartment, she found Godwin frail, his once strong arms now thin, his smile weak. She wept, holding him as though to make up for every night she had been gone. He whispered, "You came back," and that night, they made love again, their midnight embrace now filled with desperation. Mary kissed every scar of his illness, Godwin clung to her as though she were breath itself. It was tender, broken, and achingly beautiful. But time is cruel. Godwin's illness deepened. The money Mary brought could not heal him. Their dreams of a house, of children, of a life beyond cracked walls, all slipped away. One night, as rain tapped gently on the window, Godwin lay weak on their bed. Mary held him close, her tears soaking his chest. He whispered, "Do you regret marrying me?" Her sobs shook her body as she shook her head. "Never. You were my love, my sacrifice, my pain, my embrace. You were everything." And with that, Godwin closed his eyes, his arms still around her, his final breath a whisper of love. Mary stayed in his embrace long after his heart had stopped. Because letting go was impossible. Mary lived on, carrying Godwin in her heart. She never remarried. She worked, she aged, she walked through life with quiet dignity. But every night, when midnight came, she lay on her bed, closed her eyes, and remembered the warmth of his arms. Marriage had given her love. Money had brought her sacrifice. Midnight sex had given her the power of embrace that even death could not erase. Her story was not one of fairy tale happiness. It was one of love's endurance, of pain carried with grace, of sacrifice that defined the soul. And in her heart, Godwin lived forever.